Assalamu alaikum, and welcome back to our channel, True Courtroom Stories. Today, we're diving into some fascinating research by Mr. Zahir Ahmed Mir. We're going to look at a courtroom drama from the 12th century and ask a pretty big question. What can it possibly teach us about justice in our world today? Well, as it turns out, a whole lot more than you might think. We're about to unpack a simple yet incredibly powerful story about a sultan and a merchant that holds a lesson about fairness that feels, well, stunningly modern and universal.
All right, let's get right into it. I want you to try and picture the scene with me. We're going back in time, way back to the 12th century. We find ourselves right in the heart of the Ayyubid Sultanate, which was this huge, powerful empire stretching all across the Middle East. Now, this wasn't a simple place. It was a real melting pot of different faiths, different cultures, and a whole bunch of legal traditions, all ruled by one person at the top. The power structure was crystal clear, it was rigid, and for most people, it was totally unshakable.
And right there, in the middle of this vast empire, a conflict starts to simmer. It begins with a Christian merchant. Now, in the grand scheme of things, he's an outsider, especially when you think about the corridors of power, but he does something incredibly bold. He decides to bring a formal complaint. You have to understand, in a society with such a strict hierarchy, this was more than just a gutsy move. It was a risk that could have cost him absolutely everything. The odds were, to put it mildly, not in his favor.
And the accusation itself? It's just explosive. He claims that his valuable goods, his livelihood, were stolen. But here's the real kicker, the detail that changes everything. He isn't accusing some random thief on the street. No, he points his finger directly at a Muslim officer, a man who is part of the state, a man who has considerable power, and a man who belongs to the dominant faith of the empire. This is the definition of a David and Goliath story, and you can just feel how high the stakes are.
So, as you can imagine, a complaint this serious doesn't just get handled at the local level. The sheer gravity of it, a common merchant accusing an officer of the state, means it just keeps getting pushed up the chain of command all the way to the very top. It actually lands on the desk of the Sultan himself, the legendary Salahuddin Ayyubi. At this point, you can bet the entire court is watching. Everyone is holding their breath, waiting to see what happens next, probably assuming that power will, as it always does, protect its own.
But what Salahuddin does next is, well, it's swift, it's decisive, and it's probably the last thing anyone expected. There's no waffling, no hesitation. First, he orders a full impartial investigation to be launched immediately. Second, and this is huge, to make sure there's no way the officer could influence the investigation or intimidate anyone, he's suspended from his duties right away. And third, in what is just a truly remarkable move, the Sultan orders that the merchant be paid back in full for everything he lost before the investigation is even finished. Think about that. This isn't just about finding a guilty party. It's about a process that is built on fairness from the very beginning. It's about making the victim whole again, right away.
Now, an action like this, so fast and so clearly in favor of the Christian merchant, must have sent absolute shockwaves through the entire court. And it brings up a really important question about what on earth was motivating the Sultan.
I mean, you've got to wonder, right? Why would a sultan, one of the most powerful men in the world, take the side of a merchant from a different faith against one of his own high-ranking officers? Why would he risk upsetting the entire structure of his administration, maybe even making his own people angry? What kind of principle could possibly be so important that it overrides social status, military power, and even religious loyalty?
And this is the heart of the whole story. When he was asked about his decision, Salahuddin's answer was so simple, yet it was so profound that it has echoed down through the centuries. For him, it wasn't about faith or power or status. It was about a core belief, a fundamental principle. He saw justice as a debt that was owed to every single person living under his rule. He said, "Justice is owed to every human, not only Muslims."
So what he was doing was putting into practice this incredible idea that we now have a name for, universal justice. And what is that? It's the principle that certain rights, like the right to be treated fairly, aren't things that a ruler gives you. They're not tied to who you are, what you believe, or where you come from. They are inherent. They belong to you just because you're a human being. So you see, Salahuddin wasn't just solving one single case. He was making a powerful statement about the very character of his kingdom.
Okay, so this is where the story gets even bigger. Let's fast forward through history, because this incredible idea of universal justice didn't just stay in a 12th century courtroom. It's like a seed that, once it's planted in fertile ground, just keeps growing. It sprouts up again and again in different times and in different places, usually right when people need it the most.
And this timeline really shows you just how powerful and timeless that idea is. Hundreds of years after Salahuddin, in 1954, you have the U.S. Supreme Court making its landmark decision in Brown versus the Board of Education. This decision completely dismantled the idea of separate but equal and declared that justice cannot be divided along racial lines. It changed America forever. Then, let's jump forward again to 2014 in Pakistan. The Supreme Court's Jilani judgment powerfully restated that the government has a fundamental duty to protect its religious minorities, creating a whole new framework for their rights and their safety. We're talking about 3 totally different moments in history, 3 different parts of the world, but all of them are echoing that exact same core principle.
This table here just lays it out so clearly. It really drives the whole point home. When you break it down and look at them side by side, it's pretty incredible. In each one of these cases, even though they're separated by centuries and by entire continents, the fundamental principle is exactly the same. In the Ayyubid Sultanate, it was that justice must be blind to a person's religious identity. In the United States, after a long, painful struggle, the ruling was that justice must be blind to racial identity. And in modern Pakistan, the court affirmed that real justice means you have to actively protect the rights of all your minority groups. It's the same beautiful idea of universal rights, being fought for and being won over and over again.
So, what's the big lesson here? What's the point of drawing this straight line from a sultan in the 12th century all the way to a courtroom in the 21st? Well, it's because it tells us something incredibly important about this idea, and maybe something important about ourselves too.
So here are the key takeaways. First, the deep human need for fair, impartial justice isn't tied to one culture or one era. It's universal. Second, the true test of any society, the real way to measure its greatness, is to see how it treats and protects its most vulnerable members. Third, and this one is so important, this principle is never guaranteed. It's not something that's won permanently. It has to be fought for, argued for, and defended by every single generation. And finally, and this is the one that gives me hope, empires will rise and they will fall. But an idea as powerful and as true as universal justice, that can last forever.
And so, that leaves us with this final question to think about. Salahuddin's empire is now just a distant memory, but his principle feels more urgent and relevant than ever. When we look at our own world, which is still so divided by identity, when we see the conflicts and the inequalities all around us, where do we need to hear these words? Justice is owed to every human the most. It's definitely something to think about. If you found this story as powerful as I did, please do subscribe to our channel, give this video a like, and please share it with your friends so more people can hear it. Thanks for watching.
You know, when we think about history, we often picture these huge, dramatic events. But sometimes a revolution doesn't start on a battlefield. Sometimes it starts in a courtroom, with just a few carefully chosen words. Today, we're going to dive into a story like that, a story about just 4 words that completely rocked a nation and forced it to look in the mirror. So let me ask you something right off the bat. Can you really separate 2 things, or 2 groups of people, and have the outcome be perfectly equal? I mean, really think about it. Is that even possible? This very question, as simple as it sounds, was at the absolute heart of a legal fight that would forever change the United States. So keep that idea in your head, because we're about to see how the highest court in the land finally gave its answer.
Now, to really get a grip on just how massive this moment was, we're going to follow the path laid out for us in one particular source. Our whole explainer today is guided by the way this story is told in a collection of really powerful legal cases. And that source is a book called True Courtroom Stories, researched by Mr. Zahir Ahmed Mir. Now, this book looks at a bunch of different legal battles that really shook things up, but it presents one case in particular as a turning point that forced an entire country to face a massive contradiction it had been living with for a very long time. The book zooms in on this one legal showdown that was about so much more than just one person or one city or one school. Nope, this was about the entire legal and moral blueprint that had been used to manage race relations for almost a century. It was a battle for the very soul of the country's laws. And that case, of course, is Brown versus the Board of Education. You've probably heard the name, but its importance is just impossible to overstate. It stands as one of the most significant Supreme Court decisions ever made, because it took on not just a law, but a deeply, deeply ingrained way of life.
Okay, so let's set the scene. The year is 1954, and you have to really try to put yourself in that time to get the full impact. This wasn't the Dark Ages, but it was a fundamentally different America than the one we know today. In many parts of the country, a very strict, very rigid social order was enforced by the power of the law, and that's the order this ruling was about to detonate. And the issue at the absolute center of it all was segregation. Now, this wasn't just about people preferring to stick to their own groups. No, this was a legal system. It was written into law that people had to be separated based on their race, in schools, on public transport, in restaurants, everywhere. And for more than 50 years, the whole system was held up by this one legal idea: separate but equal. The argument was, hey, as long as the facilities for everyone are equal, it's totally constitutional to keep them separate. The Brown case looked at that idea and asked, is that really true? So you can just imagine the tension. The entire country was basically holding its breath. The 9 justices on the Supreme Court had to answer that one huge question. Can separate ever truly be equal? Can you legally divide your own citizens by race and not cause profound, lasting damage? The future of millions of people, and really the moral credibility of the U.S. Constitution, was all on the line. And then the answer came. 4 simple but world-shattering words. Separate is inherently unequal. Just let that sink in. It wasn't some long, complicated legal argument full of jargon. It was a straight-up, powerful, and unanimous declaration. With that one sentence, the court didn't just tweak the old rule from the Plessy versus Ferguson case. It took a sledgehammer to it. It completely destroyed the foundation of the separate but equal doctrine. They were saying segregation wasn't just unfair in practice. It was unjust in its very essence. The real magic, the real power, is in that one word, inherently. This is the absolute key to the whole thing. The court wasn't saying, well, these segregated schools are unequal because the black schools have less funding or older books. That would have been an easier argument to make. But they went so much deeper. They argued that the act itself of separating children from other children just because of their race creates a feeling of inferiority, a wound to their hearts and minds that might never ever heal. The separation was the damage. It was unequal by its very nature. So you can imagine the legal fallout. It was an absolute earthquake. Because if separation is inherently unequal, well then any law that allows for it or forces it is automatically a violation of the Constitution's promise of equal protection. Just like that, with one ruling, the entire legal framework that held segregation in place was declared unconstitutional. It was delegitimized overnight. But a decision like this isn't just about legal theory, right? It's about how it changes things in the real world, for real people. The analysis in the book we're looking at really boils the impact down to 2 huge immediate outcomes that started to completely reshape the country. So first, the ruling became this powerful new legal shield for minority groups. For the first time, the Constitution was being used in this incredibly strong way to protect them from discrimination that was written into law. But the second outcome, wow, this one was even bigger. It was a full frontal assault on what's called institutional discrimination. The court didn't just throw out one bad rule. It kickstarted the incredibly long and difficult process of taking apart the entire system that made those rules possible in the first place. So what exactly is institutional discrimination? The easiest way to think about it is like this. Imagine the entire rulebook for society is written to give one group an advantage. It's not about one person being prejudiced. It's when the prejudice is baked right into the system itself, into the laws, the official policies, the way things have always been done. It's discrimination that has become so normal, it's practically invisible. It's just part of the fabric of society. I mean, just look at the scale of this change. Before this ruling, the legal system basically gave a green light to racial discrimination. It was, in many places, official policy. The system allowed it. After the ruling, the entire purpose of the system was flipped on its head. The law was no longer allowed to be a passive bystander. It was now required to be an active protector against discrimination. That's a complete 180-degree turn in what the law is for. All right, so let's tie this all together. What is the biggest takeaway from this historic ruling? Why do those 4 words, separate is inherently unequal, still echo so powerfully all these decades later? And why does the book by Mr. Mir feature it so prominently as a critical story to understand? Well, its lasting importance really comes down to 3 things. First, by totally dismantling separate but equal, the court exposed this half-century-old legal idea for what it was, a lie used to justify inequality. Second, it created a brand new, much deeper standard for what equality actually means, looking beyond just buildings and budgets to the real psychological and social damage of a law. And finally, and maybe this is the most important part, it affirmed a profound truth.
You cannot create an equal society by first dividing people. It's just not possible. Real equality demands inclusion.
And that brings us to a final thought, a question to leave you with. That ruling was back in 1954, but the principle behind it is absolutely timeless. So when you look around at our world today, where else do you see systems, or practices, or separations that are, by their very nature, inherently unequal? The conversation that those 4 words started in that courtroom all those years ago, well, it's definitely not over.
You know, we talk a lot about justice, but how do you actually measure it? How do you know if a court system, a whole country's legal framework, is truly working? Is it about locking up bad guys, or is it something deeper? Well, today, we're diving into a landmark judgment that gives us a really powerful, and I think pretty profound answer to that question. Our whole exploration is based on the incredible research of Mr. Zahir Ahmad Mir from his work True Courtroom Stories. And trust me, what we're about to unpack sets a standard for justice that resonates everywhere.
So, let's start with a basic question. What actually gives a court its authority? It's a serious question, right? Is it just the government that sets it up? Is it the grand old buildings with towering columns? Or the complicated laws written in dusty books that you need a special degree to even understand? The source material we're looking at today suggests no, it's none of those things. It argues that the real power, the moral legitimacy of any court, boils down to a single fundamental test.
And there you have it. This right here is the core idea for our entire discussion today. Just let that sink in for a moment. A court earns its legitimacy by protecting the weakest citizen. It's not about the high-profile cases with famous people. It's not about making powerful corporations pay fines. A court proves its real worth, its entire reason for being, when it stands up for the person with absolutely no power, no connections, no loud voice, the most vulnerable person in the room. This isn't just a legal idea. It's a powerful statement about what a truly just and decent society is supposed to look like.
Okay, so that's a beautiful principle, isn't it? It sounds right, it feels right, but let's get real. How does a court, which is basically an institution of rules and paperwork and procedures, actually do that? What does protecting the weakest mean in the real world, in tangible, everyday terms? It's one thing to say the words, but what actions have to back them up? This is the exact question that our source material, True Courtroom Stories, helps us answer, and it does it by showing us a groundbreaking case. The answer we're looking for comes to us from the Supreme Court of Pakistan back in 2014. It's known as the Jilani Judgment, named for the justice who wrote the decision, Justice Tassaduq Jilani. Now, this ruling has become famous among legal experts and human rights advocates all over the globe, and for a very specific reason. It provides an incredibly clear and powerful blueprint for how to turn that noble idea of protecting the vulnerable into concrete, real-world, enforceable action. What's so crucial to understand about this case is that it wasn't some abstract, theoretical debate in a quiet courtroom. Not at all. This judgment was a direct response to very real violence, threats, and fear that minority communities were facing. So when Justice Jilani and the court issued this ruling, they weren't just writing law. They were responding to an urgent cry for help. They were forging a real-world answer to that big question we asked: how do you actually protect the vulnerable? And their answer has since become a gold standard for judicial courage and responsibility. So how did the court do it? How did they build this bridge from a beautiful principle to a practical reality? Well, the judgment is constructed on 3 incredibly strong foundational pillars. And these aren't just polite suggestions or recommendations. No, these are clear, firm directives. They are the core machinery that the court designed to make sure that protecting the weakest isn't just a nice thought, but a guaranteed fact. Let's take a look at what they are. So here they are, the 3 pillars, nice and simple. First, equal protection for all citizens. Second, and this one is a really big deal, the state has an active duty to prevent harm. And third, ensuring the sanctity and protection of all places of worship. You see how they work together? They create this comprehensive shield, this framework for safeguarding the rights of minorities. Let's dig into each one of these a little deeper. Now, the first pillar, equal protection, might sound pretty basic, right? Something every country says it does. But the key words here are without exception. That phrase has so much power. This isn't just about putting a nice sentence in a constitution. It's a court ordering the state, in no uncertain terms, to use its entire apparatus, its police, its courts, its resources, to protect a minority citizen with the exact same energy and commitment as it would for anyone else. It means there's no such thing as a second-class citizen when the law is involved. Your rights aren't up for debate. They are absolute. Okay, now this second pillar, this is a total game changer. This is where the judgment gets truly revolutionary. It completely flips the script on the government's role. See, it's not enough for the state to just not be discriminatory itself. The court said the state has a positive, active, moral, and legal duty to step into society and prevent discrimination from happening in the first place. Think about that. It means proactively creating policies that foster tolerance. It means using the education system to teach respect for diversity. It means prosecuting hate speech quickly and forcefully. It's the difference between a firefighter who only shows up when the house is already burning down and a fire marshal who inspects the wiring and teaches fire safety to make sure the fire never, ever starts.
And the third pillar, this is where the abstract principle becomes something you can see and touch. A place of worship, whether it's a temple, a church, a mosque, a synagogue, a gurdwara, it's never just a building. It's the spiritual heart of a community. It's a symbol of identity, of history, of belonging. By ordering the state to provide mandatory, physical protection for these places, the court sent an unmistakable message. A message that says, your community is valued, your faith is respected, and your right to gather and worship in peace is guaranteed. It's a powerful, visible commitment from the state that says you are safe here.
Okay, so we've seen the what. We've seen the three pillars that form the structure of the judgment. But now we really need to understand the why. What's the deep philosophical idea holding it all up? In legal terms, the core reasoning, the single principle that a whole decision is built on, is called the ratio decidendi. It's basically the beating heart of the ruling. And in the Jilani judgment, it's captured in one of the most elegant and powerful sentences I think you'll ever find in a legal text. And there it is, the ratio decidendi. Justice does not identify religion, it only identifies truth. Just think about that. This single sentence is the engine that drives every single part of this judgment. It says that true justice has to be blindfolded. It cannot be allowed to see a person's faith or their ethnicity or how much money they have. The only thing justice is supposed to look for, its one and only mission, is to find the truth. So here's the most brilliant part. That one sentence is the master key that unlocks all three pillars we just talked about. Why does there have to be equal protection? Because justice only sees truth, not who you are. Why must the state actively prevent discrimination? Because discrimination is a poison that lies about people and hides the truth. Why must every place of worship be protected? Because attacking a place of worship is an act of identity-based hate, and justice must reject identity to find truth. You see, it perfectly shows how one clear, powerful moral idea can be the foundation for an entire practical legal framework. It's just elegant. Now, it's really important to remember that while this judgment was delivered by Pakistan's Supreme Court, its wisdom, its message is truly global. The principles it lays out aren't just for Pakistan or for any one culture or religion. It speaks to a universal human challenge, one that every single diverse society on this planet has to grapple with. How do we all live together? And how do we make sure that justice works for everyone, not just for the people who are already powerful? And that brings us right back to where we started. The Jilani judgment gives us a benchmark, a measuring stick. If you really want to understand the character of a nation, don't look at its skyscrapers or its military might. Don't look at how it treats its billionaires and celebrities. Look, as this judgment demands, at how it treats its most vulnerable, its most forgotten, its most marginalized citizens. That is the ultimate test. That is what reveals a society's true commitment to justice, freedom, and basic human dignity. So as we start to wrap this up, let's just quickly recap the big ideas we've taken from the Jilani judgment, all thanks to the research in True Courtroom Stories. First, real justice is measured by how it protects the vulnerable. Second, a just state has an active duty to get out there and prevent harm, not just clean up the mess afterward. And third, the whole system has to be built on one core belief, that justice must be blind to identity in its search for truth. These aren't just legal points, they're a universal standard for all of us. I want to leave you with one last question to think about. When a justice system makes its number one mission to protect the most vulnerable person, who does that really empower? Well, yeah, obviously, it empowers that vulnerable person, and that's incredibly important. But it does something so much bigger. It empowers every single person in that society. It sends a message that the rule of law is real, that it's not just for sale to the highest bidder. It strengthens the entire social fabric, it builds trust, and it ensures that if any of us, you or me, ever find ourselves in a moment of weakness or need, the system will be there, not to judge us, but to find the truth.
And that is our look into the incredible Jilani judgment. This deep dive was only possible because of the fantastic research done by Mr. Zahir Ahmad Mir in his work True